The only good is knowledge. The only evil is ignorance.
The notion that the Thousand Sons deserve destruction may seem unduly harsh, yet it holds an undeniable truth. At its core, the Horus heresy stands as a tragedy. The legions suffered, the Primarchs endured anguish, and the Imperium bore the weight of its consequences. Humanity continues to reel from its aftermath. Even the traitor Primarchs ensnared in the heresy's web were not exempt from its tragic grip. Fulgrim fell victim to a keeper of secrets, descending into hedonistic depravity. Angron, coerced by Lorgar, was thrust into demonhood despite his desire for honorable death in battle. Mortarion and the Death Guard endured torment until they succumbed to Nurgle's loathsome gifts. Lastly, Magnus the Red, manipulated and broken, inadvertently betrayed his father's vision, facing near annihilation in return. The burning of Prospero stands as a tragic chapter, albeit one not devoid of reason. It's often argued that among the legions, the Thousand Sons were the greatest victims of the heresy. While there's some validity to this claim, the reality is far more intricate. A prevalent misconception suggests that the Thousand Sons merely harnessed their inherent psychic abilities, akin to other legions librarians utilizing their powers strategically on the battlefield, with caution to avoid the dangers of the Sea of Souls. However, the truth diverges significantly from such assumptions. The Thousand Sons delve deeper than mere utilization of innate gifts. They immerse themselves in sorcery, summoning demons and engaging in rituals that were intimately intertwined with the Empyrean. Their culture was steeped in the use of warp energies with scant regard for caution, even before their reunion with Magnus. The flesh change, a genetic flaw causing grotesque mutations, was a direct consequence of this relationship with the warp, heavily hinted to bear Zentian origins. Reuniting with their Primarch didn't assuage these practices. Instead, it exacerbated them. Magnus's fascination with the Empyrean led the Thousand Sons deeper into their reliance on psychic abilities, gradually losing themselves in its allure. Undoubtedly, some of you may harbor reservations about my previous assertions. Indeed, the Thousand Sons are not the sole legion entangled in a complex relationship with the warp. The Space Wolves and the White Scars also utilized the Sea of Souls, perhaps even engaging with demonic entities. Admittedly, the Space Wolves' practices were steeped in hypocrisy, their rituals perilous, and their dealings with warp entities potentially exposing the Legion to the corruptive influences of the ruinous powers. However, there exists a fundamental disparity in how they approached the Empyrean compared to the Thousand Sons. The Space Wolves exercised caution when delving into the warp, cognizant of its inherent dangers. They recognized its allure as a poisoned fruit and refrained from excessive use, thereby safeguarding themselves from corruption. Their prudent approach provided a semblance of protection. Likewise, the White Scars epitomize moderation in their engagement with psychic abilities. A Chagorian adage encapsulates their philosophy: sip at the cup, but leave the dregs. This ethos emphasizes the importance of moderation and understanding the nature of psychic powers. In contrast, the Thousand Sons would displayed an unrestrained pursuit of knowledge and an over-reliance on the poorly understood powers of the warp. The culmination of the Thousand Sons' reckless practices manifested in the Council of Nicaea, where psychic powers were outright banned. Magnus and his legion bore significant responsibility for this censure, their dalliances with demons and unrestrained sorcery cited as primary catalysts for the trial. Magnus's obliviousness to the true reasons behind the censure during the trial underscored the necessity of such stringent measures. His hubris and unwavering dependence on his psychic prowess ultimately sealed his fate. Today we delve into the history of the Thousand Sons, the most powerful psykers among the legions of old. Like their predecessors among the Legiones Astartes, the 15th Space Marine Legion was initially formed on Terra by the Emperor of Mankind, with its original recruits drawn from the Terran populace. Their gene seed originated from Primarch Magnus the Red and was implanted into the first Thousand Sons Astartes within the gene laboratories of Luna during a brief surge of warp storms within the Sol system. This surge of warp activity led to psychic phenomena worldwide, resulting in spontaneous outbreaks of violence. While it's unlikely that this activity had additional mutational effects on the Legion's gene seed, Primarch Magnus perceived these events, learned years later after his discovery by the Emperor on Prospero as ominous omens for his Legion's future. The initial cadre of Thousand Sons legionaries, known as student aspirants, were selected from psychically gifted individuals who had been citizens of the former Achaemenid Empire on Terra. This empire, ruled by the Emperor for nearly a standard century, had experienced less devastation during the Emperor's unification wars compared to other regions. Chosen from promising Achaemenid families identified by the Emperor, these young men were transported to the Emperor's clandestine gene laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, where experiments in human enhancement and the creation of Primarchs had begun. Among the first student aspirants were Asek Ahriman and his twin brother, Ormuzd Ahriman. Once established, the 15th Legion was deployed by the Emperor to quell remaining pockets of techno-barbarian resistance on Terra, demonstrating their prowess. Formally christened the Thousand Sons by the Emperor after their success, they were granted their own expeditionary fleet to contribute to the Great Crusade, aimed at uniting humanity under the newborn Imperium of Man. Approximately 5 standard years after the commencement of the Great Crusade, aimed at reclaiming and unifying the human-settled galaxy, the Thousand Sons began to manifest potent psychic abilities. Initially welcomed by its Astartes as a means to emulate the Emperor, this development was reluctantly tolerated by the Emperor himself, who harbored deep wariness towards psychic abilities wielded by entities other than himself or Malcador the Sigillite. However, the Thousand Sons' psychic prowess proved invaluable to the Imperium's cause during the Great Crusade. Employing sorcerous tactics, the Thousand Sons eschewed costly frontal assaults, instead subjugating populations with their warp-derived powers. This unorthodox approach drew the ire of Leman Russ of the Space Wolves Legion, who viewed anything less than direct confrontation as dishonorable. The Legion's elation at their newfound abilities soon turned to horror as a wave of degenerative mutations termed the Flesh Change afflicted large portions of its battle brothers. Stasis was employed for those affected in hopes of finding a cure, but the Legion's numbers dwindled dangerously as a result. The Emperor's arrival at Prospero reunited the Thousand Sons with their Primarch Magnus amidst the horror of the Flesh Change. Magnus intervened to stabilize their gene seed and save those least affected. However, only 1,000 battle brothers were salvaged from the devastation. Replenishing their ranks with recruits from Prospero, the Thousand Sons returned to the Great Crusade under Magnus's leadership. Utilizing diplomatic cunning and psychic prowess, they brought numerous worlds into imperial compliance, but faced increasing opposition from adversaries wielding similar psychic abilities. Over the course of the Great Crusade, many Primarchs voiced their discontent regarding the use of these so-called psychic powers. Rumors and condemnations began to circulate regarding the Thousand Sons Legion among the other expeditionary fleets, with the Primarchs of the Death Guard, Imperial Fists, and Raven Guard legions being the most vocal detractors. The majority of the 15th Legion's battle brothers had fallen victim to rampant genetic mutations, while those unaffected witnessed a dramatic increase in their psychic abilities. Detractors of the Thousand Sons petitioned the Emperor for the Legion's disbandment and removal from imperial records, akin to the fate of the 2nd and 11th Legions. The Emperor himself harbored displeasure at the Thousand Sons' manipulation of the corrupting powers of the warp. As suspicion grew surrounding Magnus and the dangers of psychic abilities became apparent through the ravaged worlds of the Age of Strife, the Imperium debated the use of psychers. To address the issue decisively, the Emperor convened an imperial conclave on the remote planet of Nicaea, gathering all Primarchs and key imperial officials. At the forefront of the debate stood Magnus, passionately advocating for the importance of psychers and sorcery in advancing the Imperium and concluding the Great Crusade. Opposing him were the Space Wolves, led by Primarch Leman Russ, who condemned sorcery as unclean and cowardly, and the Death Guard, with Primarch Mortarion personally denouncing psychic powers. As consensus emerged that psychers posed a potential threat to the Imperium's populace, the Emperor decreed that, in the interest of unity, prior actions involving psychic abilities would not be censured. However, the use of psychic abilities in the Imperium's military forces was banned, except for sanctioned roles such as astropaths, navigators, and closely monitored psychers like the Sisters of Silence. Astartes Legion librarians were disbanded, with their members returning to conventional combat roles. Effectively barred from practicing sorcery or using their psychic abilities, the Thousand Sons clandestinely collected forbidden knowledge from conquered worlds, compiling it into the notorious tome known as the Book of Magnus during their campaigns in the Great Crusade. Upon learning of Horus's betrayal and his allegiance to the ruinous powers, Magnus the Red utilized his psychic abilities to convey a message to the Imperial Palace on Terra, directly contacting the Emperor mind to mind. However, this ruptured the palace's formidable psychic defenses, resulting in the deaths of thousands unable to withstand Magnus's potent psychic call. Despite Magnus's warning, the Emperor, refusing to believe Horus capable of treachery, suspected Magnus of corruption due to his use of banned, sorcerous powers. The Emperor ordered the Space Wolves Legion to arrest Magnus and bring him to Terra for judgment. However, manipulated by Horus, the Space Wolves were directed to assault Prospero instead. Magnus foresaw this attack, but, in an act of repentance and sacrifice, refrained from warning his legion or defending the planet, cloaking it in a psychic veil. He dispersed the Thousand Sons fleet to prevent their involvement. The Space Wolves' surprise attack devastated Prospero with an orbital bombardment, reducing much of it to cinders. Tizca, protected by a psychic void shield, became the focal point of the invasion. Despite Magnus's acceptance of defeat, the Thousand Sons resisted the invaders. Magnus reluctantly engaged Leman Russ in a duel, but was defeated. Utilizing ancient sorceries, Magnus escaped to the Eye of Terror, where he was transformed into a demon prince by Tzeentch. Following the siege of Prospero, the Thousand Sons became bitter enemies of the Space Wolves. They attempted multiple times to destroy their adversaries, including establishing a Chaos Temple on Fenris, known as the Demon Spire, and stealing the Spear of Russ to transform the planet Garm into a demon world. Despite the loss of the spear, the world was saved by the Imperial Guard, with Ragnar Blackmane banishing Magnus back to the warp.
All is dust.
As time passed, the surviving Thousand Sons Marines fell prey once again to the relentless mutations inflicted by the chaos energies of the Eye of Terror. Tzeentch, their patron chaos power, epitomized change and bestowed mutational gifts upon his followers. Upon arrival in the Eye of Terror, several Thousand Sons battle brothers mutated uncontrollably into mindless chaos spawn, defying all efforts to halt the spread of mutation. Humanity slipped away from the Thousand Sons, their only solace shattered by the horrors of the Horus Heresy and the devastation of Prospero. Arzek Ahriman, chief librarian of the Thousand Sons and longtime confidant of Magnus the Red, witnessed the gene curse, known as the Flesh Change, afflict his brethren at the outset of the Great Crusade. Vowing to halt its rampage, Ahriman devoted himself entirely to finding a solution. Witnessing his twin brother Ormuzd transform into an abomination fueled Ahriman's resolve. Amidst the Thousand Sons' exile to the planet of the sorcerers, Ahriman conceived the rubric of Ahriman to prevent further mutation. Despite opposition, the Legion's sorcerers united to unleash the rubric. The cataclysmic spell struck every Thousand Sons Marine. Those lacking psychic power disintegrated, their souls now bound to their power armor, their bodies became dust, animating their now mostly empty suits of armor. While those who were already gifted with psychic potential became even more powerful. Magnus, poised to punish Ahriman and his cabal, was thwarted by Tzeentch, who deemed them valuable pawns. Exiled from the planet of sorcery, Ahriman's cabal wanders the galaxy, seeking the true meaning of chaos. Ahriman, now a harbinger of corruption, seeks artifacts and psykers to bolster the ruinous power's arsenal, prompting the Inquisition's relentless pursuit. Despite their efforts, Ahriman continues to recruit and amass power across the galaxy, posing a dire threat to the Imperium.
The minds of gods are not for mortals to know or to judge. Accept that Tzeentch has a place for all of us in his grand scheme, and be happy in the part you have to play.
Magnus truly orchestrated his own downfall. Unlike other Primarchs, he received multiple warnings from the Emperor about the dangers of the warp, yet he stubbornly clung to his own perspective. His advocacy for sorcery during the Council stemmed from a corrupted viewpoint, failing to grasp its inherently corruptive nature. His profound misunderstanding of the warp led to his own demise and that of his legion. Though manipulated by Tzeentch, Magnus ultimately charted his own path to damnation. Regarding the fate of the Thousand Sons, it prompts contemplation. Did they merit destruction due to the hazards posed by their sorcerous practices? Could there have been an alternative? Perhaps they weren't irredeemably corrupted from the outset and could have been saved. These questions linger, inviting diverse perspectives and reflections. What are your thoughts on Magnus and the Thousand Sons? Do you believe they deserved their fate, or do you see potential for redemption? I'm eager to hear your insights. Wishing you a fantastic week, and I look forward to our next discussion.